Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr & Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager podcast. It's February 6th, 2025. On this day in 1867, the American merchant and financier George Peabody made a move that cemented his legacy as one of the nation's most notable philanthropists. He established a foundation to improve schools in impoverished Southern communities, and that effort can still be seen at work today on the Peabody Campus of Vanderbilt University. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. If you're not quite sure what I mean by Peabody Campus, it's the part of Vanderbilt that seems to be off to the side, away from the rest of the academic buildings. It's across 21st Avenue from Vanderbilt Medical Center. A long, grassy quad is surrounded on three sides by classically beautiful classroom buildings. The fourth side looks across to the university school. That private school is independent now, but it used to be part of the Peabody campus. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Peabody campus wasn't always part of Vanderbilt. And the story of how that land has been used is actually a great object lesson in the way higher education has evolved over the years in Nashville. The current academic work being done there traces directly back to the city's very first college, called the University of Nashville. Now, it wasn't on that land back in the early days. Its first campus is actually in use now as metro offices. The Richard Fulton or Howard School campus, just south of downtown, still uses some of the old University of Nashville buildings. The University of Nashville predates public schooling in the city by decades. Its origin story is complicated, but suffice it to say that in the early days of this city, it was a place for wealthy young men to come and get an education at the highest level then available in the southern U.S. Under the leadership of a man called Philip Lindsley, it was an ambitious institution that recruited professors from across the United States and Europe. That school is the reason Nashville was first nicknamed the Athens of the South, comparing the city to the academic center of ancient Greece. When I research local history, some of the most interesting people of the period before the Civil War are the folks Lindsley hired to teach at the University of Nashville. The ones who brought high-minded art and music and literature to what was otherwise a rough and tumble frontier town. But it was still a really rough era. And the cholera epidemic pretty much wiped out the school in 1850. And about a decade later, of course, everything was disrupted by war. So from 1850 on, the university only existed in pieces. Specific academic programs that managed to survive almost independent of each other, while other programs could never quite regroup. Honestly, it's a pretty good metaphor for Nashville as a whole during that era. Okay, so after the Civil War, as the University of Nashville existed in that weird, fragmented state, there was a big push to educate the newly freed population of Black folks across the South. That's when Fisk University was founded as one of the nation's original HBCUs. And around the same time, another Nashville school called Roger Williams University got its start. It was a Baptist college that initially trained Black ministers. Over the years, it expanded to have more degree programs, including medicine. And in 1874, Roger Williams University moved out of temporary quarters and established what was supposed to be its permanent home on what we now know as the Peabody campus. Now, that was a really big move for the school. The ambition that administrators had for Roger Williams was every bit as big as what there used to be for the University of Nashville. In 1886, just 2 decades after emancipation, it had developed to the point of establishing a master's degree program. That's significant. And white Nashville did not like it. Maybe especially not while the remnants of the once proud University of Nashville were still essentially limping along. Arsonists set fire to the buildings on multiple occasions. Long story short, developers masquerading as a Christian mission agency eventually managed to buy the land and then established a covenant that barred any Black people from living on it. The school tried to keep things going, but it basically broke into pieces. Some faculty and staff moved together to another HBCU in Memphis. Another piece of it moved to North Nashville as the American Baptist Seminary, which is still in operation. But remember the fractured University of Nashville? Perhaps you're wondering why I even brought it up in the first place. Well, after Roger Williams University vacated the campus on 21st Avenue, the teacher training piece of the old University of Nashville moved in. One of the reasons it had survived to that point was because in the 1870s, some local leaders secured money from George Peabody's Educational Foundation. That major infusion of cash didn't just keep the program alive, it gave it a new sense of purpose. And when the University of Nashville finally truly fell apart, that program was renamed a couple of times, ultimately landing on the George Peabody College for Teachers. And by the early 20th century, that old sense of ambition really fired up again. The college took on the stated mission of the Peabody Fund to bring education to the poor and rural South. It became a regional leader in developing innovative teaching philosophies and methods. Its consultants were sent out to help troubled schools across the United States. It opened a demonstration school where its students worked directly with children, practicing the art of teaching under direct oversight from experienced professors. That's the university school now. But money was always an issue. Honestly, that's a common refrain for most of the higher education institutions that have existed in Nashville through the years. Believe me, there used to be many more than there are now. Money troubles are why most of them are long forgotten. But ultimately, the Peabody College was saved in the same way as the other lasting remnant of the old University of Nashville. And this is where Vanderbilt enters the picture. Back in its first year of operation, Vandy took over the University of Nashville School of Medicine. And about 100 years later, the Peabody College became part of Vanderbilt, too. So on that campus, you get a little bit of everything for Nashville's higher ed saga. The very first ambitious school, the start of a regional reputation, the bold steps forward for Black students, the clash over civil rights, perpetual financial struggles, and the evolution of Vanderbilt as a powerhouse university. In just a few minutes, Nashville youth want a solution to gun violence, and a new Metro office is looking for one. That's coming up after the newscast.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
Tennessee's legislature has passed a record-breaking number of anti-LGBTQ laws. I'm Mariana Baca-Yao, and as WPLN's Power and Equity reporter, I focus not only on how marginalized communities contend with those new laws, but how they come together in spite of them.
I think what gives me hope is that someone like you is covering this. Because if the overwhelming narrative is one of defeat, how can we have hope?
Listen here on 90.3 WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. One casualty of President Trump's potential tariffs on Mexico and Canada could be Nissan, whose North American company is based here in Franklin and where major production takes place in Rutherford County. According to Reuters, the U.S. is a major market for Nissan and other Japanese automakers, and portions of production often take place in the neighboring countries. The tariffs are on hold for 30 days, but if the president's plan of imposing the 25% levy goes through, analysts say that could doom the already struggling Nissan. The news agency reports the auto company has not done well because many models are produced for cost-conscious consumers. It's already had to head off layoffs by offering buyouts to American workers. The company that operates Middle Tennessee's largest landfill has a new idea for keeping it open. Middle Point Landfill near Murfreesboro accepts trash from 30 counties. It's projected to reach capacity in 2029. The Daily News Journal reports its owner, Republic Services, is proposing an expansion onto adjacent land owned by Rutherford County. In recent years, local officials have fought attempts to expand the facility on the land currently owned by Republic Services. The county has taken steps to draw up a new plan for dealing with waste, and a lawsuit over a previous expansion proposal is still in litigation. Nashvillians gathered this week to express their wishes for the city budget. The annual pre-budget comment period is an opportunity for residents to put their requests on record with the Metro Council before the mayor files his budget proposal. Requests this year included funding for affordable housing, youth sports, the arts, and court-appointed attorneys.
I am always going to root for raises for Metro employees because we work hard and we barely get paid enough to live where we work.
I am advocating for the varsity spending plan due to its impact on reducing gun violence. Being an Antioch resident, I'm no stranger to gun violence.
We desperately need a Nashville where we see our city's budget at work for the things that directly benefit us. Good jobs, language access in our public transportation and emergency response systems, affordable housing, and pathways for the people who built this city to remain in it.
Cost of living increases for Metro employees routinely tops the list of requests, and the varsity spending plan to reduce gun violence received partial funding last year. The mayor is required to file his budget by the end of April. The Nashville Police Department's tool for reporting minor traffic crashes saw high usage last year, as more than 10,000 people used it for filings. A new tally from MNPD estimates that self-reporting saved 15,000 office hours, which allowed police patrol teams to focus on other, more pressing issues. Online reporting is also available for a list of minor offenses that don't need an immediate police response, and those appear to have saved an additional 7,000 hours for officers. The bulk of a proposed water rate increase for portions of Chattanooga has been denied by a state commission. The request came from the Tennessee American Water Company, which is one of the few private water suppliers in the state. Their appeal had drawn strong pushback, including from Chattanooga's mayor. The state says its consumer advocacy division sided with residents and only granted $1 million of the requested $13 million from the utility. Many property owners will see an increase of just 38 cents per month. Nashville is no stranger to performing arts. Arguably more important is its rich African-American history. Pastor Sam Kirk, founder of nonprofit Youth About Business, decided to make a performative piece titled Lost and Found, A Story of Hope. It highlights the heyday of Jefferson Street and why a thriving Black community matters.
The revitalization of Jefferson Street is extremely important. The play is being hosted out in Bordeaux. It's North Nashville. And as we see the growth of this city, we hope there'll be an opportunity for people to see how can we work together to create a better outcome as opposed to the dismantling of a neighborhood and the displacement of people.
You can hear the full conversation under the This Is Nashville section of WPLN.org. Well, those giant oversized skeletons for Halloween are not hard to miss. The decorations are meant to terrify. But when a resident of Germantown near Memphis decided to decorate her 8-foot skeleton for events past Halloween, she ran afoul of the law. It held campaign flags supporting Kamala Harris in early November, and it was decorated in red and green for Christmas. Well, city ordinance makes no bones about it. Holiday and seasonal decorations are limited to how long they can be displayed. Owner Alexis Luttrell received a citation and must now appear in court on February 13th. She plans to fight this, saying it's her First Amendment right to free speech. And she says she can't wait for folks to see her skeleton dressed up for Valentine's Day.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org.
Tennessee students have now marched en masse at the Capitol in the wake of 2 school shootings. Both times they've demanded the same thing, statewide gun reform. The calls have gone unheeded. At the city level, WPLN Cynthia Abrams reports Nashville leaders are trying to listen to students.
If you ask students what they're weary of, the answer can be heard loud and clear. Guns.
By a show of hands, who has been personally affected by gun violence?
This teen is talking to the Metro Council.
Okay, put your hands down. What about suicide?
And she wasn't alone.
Now, I had a friend who only lived to see 15. He was a victim to gun violence because how much he felt doubted.
As someone who partakes in a Metro District school, I, for one, feel unsafe.
Seeing a peer get shot and or killed is not normal. Having someone close to you take their own life is not normal. Having numerous family members and friends incarcerated on the daily is not normal.
These kids came together with the Southern Movement Committee. The group wants to harness student experiences into advocacy, specifically around safety that doesn't rely on the police. They decided to ask council for $10 million for restorative justice programs in community centers and schools, and to create a new Office of Youth Safety. For once, this worked. The council reallocated part of the city's tight budget to do this. Not quite the full amount, but still $1 million.
But the early idea was really thinking about how do we proactively get in front of gun violence? How do we proactively create a space for folks to address their conflict?
That's Erica Perry with the Southern Movement Committee.
It also comes out of places like folks grieving and being like, what would have prevented a crisis from escalating into something where people lost their lives or people ended up in jail or incarcerated?
Perry envisions parenting classes, crisis support. As she reimagines public safety, her focus is on preventing violence in a holistic way.
When folks are like, we got to be really clear on what we mean by safety, because the traditional thing hasn't actually kept us safe. And so how do we redefine it by reducing the size and scope or our reliance on policing and courts and really figure out how to get in front of things?
The key person who has been listening closely is Councilmember Delicia Porterfield. She was responsible for finding a trade-off in the budget to make it happen. She says creating the office is a relatively new approach for Metro.
I think that this looks very different than anything that we've ever tried to implement before. This just looks very different. Like this is directly coming from the city.
In the past, when Metro has ventured into restorative justice, it's often been through outsourcing to local nonprofits. But that's drawn questions. Is it enough? And there's been controversy. Back in 2022, Metro allocated over $1 million to local group Gideon's Army. But to this day, that hasn't moved forward. The funds are still being held by the health department. And late last year, the group's leader publicly called out the inaction. But Porterfield thinks that the grant and the new safety office aren't mutually exclusive.
It's a both and, not an either or. We're not running away from that to now do this. These are things that can run at the same time that have, different target audiences and different approaches.
Porterfield has been meeting with the SMC and Metro's juvenile court clerk to begin laying the groundwork for the office. Meanwhile, the city is working to hire a director and staff. Things should be up and running by the summer. The work won't stop there. Perry says that ending gun violence will be a community effort.
We saw what happened in Antioch and our hearts are broken. And the invitation is to, channel that grief, that rage, that hurt, into really building out a future and shaping a future where those things don't happen. But it can only be possible if we do it together.
And while the change has been gaining some momentum, what happened at Antioch High School is a reminder of the urgency. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. A little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener-supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.